Hey, deserving listeners, it's time to continue our journey with this TV show called Married at First Sight, Season 10. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. As I always say in these videos, if you need a therapist, make sure you get it. Don't use these YouTube videos as a replacement. Let's get to the show.
Well, I definitely don't want the cooking cuts to be weird because it's weird right now. So, and I feel like you shutting down and not wanting to have a conversation, it's not going to be beneficial. So I told you what I need from you. So can you pinpoint exactly, like specifically what you need from me?
I mean, this is a conversation we've already had several times. I need you to be a little bit more vulnerable. I need you to...
How? Like, I'm tired of you keep saying the same stuff. Specific. Do you know what that means? Specific. How can I be more vulnerable for you? What are the things specifically?
Okay, so this is kind of troubling. We're seeing that Michael wants to open the conversation by making a request. He is saying, I want you to be more vulnerable. That's his message. But by his demeanor, he's shutting down. He is coming across like he's extremely upset. He's kind of pre-stonewalling her in some ways. So that's not going to help. And he almost seems like he's above it all when he says these kinds of things. Like, I just need you to be more vulnerable. Now, as I've been hypothesizing about him, I think that he has a lot of trust issues, as they say, in that he has been hurt a lot in his past. It's just a guess based on his demeanor. Because a more trusting approach to someone would be like this. It would be something like, so, honey, I don't want to piss you off and I don't want to ruin our day, but I just want to make a small request because it's sort of an issue of mine. Okay, so that would be the opener. I recommend whenever you have a request of your spouse, that's how you open it. You try to say, look, this isn't that big of a deal if it isn't that big of a deal. Or even if it is a big deal, you might want to bring it down a couple notches because if you don't do that, it might scare your spouse. And so you say, this isn't that big of a deal, but I do have a couple things to say. I don't want to make today a bad day. And honestly, I don't even know if my request is valid. I'm just going to throw it out there. And I have this urge to say, could you be more vulnerable? Because when you're more vulnerable, I really like it. Like the other day, so you want to give an example of when it went well for them. Now, what he did was he just said, I need you to be more vulnerable. Well, to Meka, it sounds like she doesn't know what that means. Now, on Meka's side, she could have been more functional by slowing down. It sounds like she's hurt by what he's saying or scared of what's happening. She goes to the secondary emotion of anger, of saying like, immediately jumping down his throat and saying, what does that mean? Now, we haven't been around with this couple all the time. Maybe Meka has heard this criticism or this request multiple times without any specifics being identified by Michael. It certainly comes across that way from the way Meka's reacting. However, a more functional way, if you're actually trying to build a good relationship, would be to say, okay, so Michael, you've said this many times, it's frustrating to me, and I have an urge to lash out at you, but I don't know what you mean by that. It sounds like you're making stuff up in your head. I don't know. So could you tell me more? Because I want to meet your request, but you're not making it easy for me by saying such simplistic statements like, I need to be more vulnerable. So you see, there are other ways to approach this. Now, a lot of people, when they're in these situations or when they're watching this TV show, there's this urge to like say, well, who's right and who's wrong? Well, as soon as you get into that kind of mindset, everyone loses. They are presumably trying to build a relationship. So if one is right and one is wrong, you've already lost. You're trying to both win, or you're trying not to compete at all. You're just saying, how are we as a couple going to actually resolve this issue? And you don't want to engage in a tit for tat of like, well, you said this, well, you said that. Well, I did this for you last time, and you need to do more for, that kind of thinking and that kind of talking, according to research by John Gottman, is one of the hallmarks of divorce. So this isn't looking too well. Let's watch how the rest of this conversation goes.
That you would like me to do. I feel like I'm being vulnerable. So tell me specifically, what do you need from me?
I need you to communicate better. I need you to not have this disposition when we have this conversation all the time, or in general conversations all the time, because your response is anger. Doesn't really work for anybody. That's not vulnerable. And your idea of vulnerable has not worked, and it does not work.
Okay, so he's coming across as accusatory as well. So a more I position statement would be for him to say something like, so by being more vulnerable, I'm actually talking about the opposite of what you're doing right now. What you're doing right now is sort of an anger response. And he said that, but then he said, that's not going to work for anyone. That's externalizing it. It's essentially saying, all of us here agree you're dumb, instead of saying, this is how it impacts me. When I made that request, I felt like I was being nice, and then you came at me with anger, which really hurts my feelings, and it makes me want to shut down. It makes me want to put up my walls, and I don't want to do that. So could you please dial it back a little bit? I don't hate you. I'm trying to work with you here. I just have a minor request and you don't have to do it. I'm just saying how I feel. And so could you maybe tone it down? Because I just want to say a few things. You don't have to do what I'm saying. That's another I statement thing to say of taking responsibility. When you make a request, you might want to point out, look, you don't have to do what I'm about to say. I'm just making a request. And I keep using the word request because in couples therapy, I will frequently use that word. Because without identifying that word, a lot of times people think they're in a fight, like who's going to be dominant, who's going to win. When I frame it as a request, then it tones it down a little bit, right? It's like, could you please pass the salt? That's a request. Could you please pick me up after work? That's a request. Could you please be more vulnerable? That's a request. Instead of, could you please be a different human being? Or you're a terrible partner because X, Y, and Z. That's not a request, that's a criticism. So there's a difference between criticism and a request, right? So I would try to get him to talk more about that. This isn't going well. Let's watch some more.
You tell me you need me to be more vulnerable. I feel like I'm being vulnerable with you. What else do you want from me?
How? Please explain to me how you think you've been vulnerable.
Because I'm still showing up. I'm still here, and I'm still trying,
Showing
no
up
matter
is
what.
half the battle. That's great.
Okay, and that's my idea of being vulnerable.
So I don't know what they're talking about right now. And I will observe arguments like this on my couch in my office often, which is he's wanting her to be more vulnerable. What does that mean? She's saying, I'm angry that you're saying for me to be vulnerable. Well, what exactly is she angry at? She could have just been like, vulnerable, huh? What do you mean by that? Obviously, there's either misunderstanding or they've been fighting about this for a long time. I don't know. So I would slow them down and say like, well, let's get a little bit more specific here because I don't really know what's happening. Okay, Michael, when you say vulnerable, what do you mean by that? Okay, Meka, when he says vulnerable, what are you hearing? Because in all likelihood, they're probably misunderstanding each other. 99%, if not 100% of conflict in couples is basically misunderstandings. Sometimes due to the person misunderstanding, someone saying something and someone's misunderstanding it, or the person saying something doesn't communicate it very well, or the person making the request doesn't even know really what they're asking because they haven't really investigated their emotional and their attachment triggers for themselves. So people are misunderstanding themselves. They're not communicating well. It's not being received well. The reaction isn't, aware. The counter awareness of that response is also a misunderstanding, and it all gets mixed up. Because what I'm guessing is happening right now is for Michael, he doesn't feel very loved, and he wants to feel safe. He wants to feel safe, and he wants to feel loved. And he has an idea of times when he's felt safe and loved by Meka. And he's had times when he didn't feel safe and he didn't feel loved. And so he's trying to get to those safe and loving places. And I'm guessing for Meka, it's the same thing. She wants to feel safe and she wants to feel loved and not criticized. That's what she wants. They both want very similar things, but by trying to communicate those things, they end up causing the other person to feel unsafe and unloved, and then they trigger each other, and then it's just a vicious cycle.
I think that's a big part of our disconnect is because you have these expectations and it's things that you need from me, but you never communicate them, and then you get mad when I don't meet them. So I'm asking you right now, specifically, what do you need from me? If it's a long list, if it's 30 things, list them out so I can start checking them off the list.
On my wasting my breath to give you a whole list of stuff if I don't think that's gonna happen. I don't feel like it is, so I'm just taking it for what I got.
So we've seen this before from both of them, where there are markers of contempt towards each other, markers of a narrative of their spouse, their wife or husband, that is extremely negative. And there's even sarcasm in there. You saw Michael say like, okay, great, you're showing up. Good for you. He did that gesture. So when you see that kind of attitude, that's not a good sign, because they didn't start with that attitudes with each other. They built that attitude. They built that narrative. And once that narrative starts to take hold in your soul, it really is destructive. It's really hard to be both in love and tolerant of your spouse and contemptuous of your spouse. It's very difficult to have both of those exist in the same human being. And once contempt goes in, John Gottman showed this through research, it's almost a sure sign that divorce will happen within a short amount of time.
That's what I'm going off of.
Right. And guess what? I had the same for you. And guess what I've been able to do, even after all that, still be open to this and still tell you what I need from you and still show up for this marriage. So that's not fair for you to now say, oh, well, you're not going to do this stuff. I felt like that. You've shown me time and time again that you're a liar, but I'm still like, show me that you're not a liar. Show me. I'm open to that. I want you to show me the other side of you. So if you feel like you already have judgments about me and you know how I'm going to act after 3 weeks of knowing me, then that is what it is. Like, you're not giving me the chance to even show you. So if that's what it's going to be, that's what it is.
You're right. So, wow. I mean, he's not even giving her eye contact. We've seen that before. He has a difficult time with eye contact, not because of a choice in all likelihood, but because of early childhood development issues, parenting issues. I don't know. It's just speculation. But he is 100% seemingly sure that she is not gonna, she's not gonna change, or that she's not gonna meet his needs, and that is, it's not a good sign. I think they're just a few weeks into their relationship, and if you have that much contempt towards someone, now they've proven as a couple that they're able to turn it around. They're able to return to positivity, and I've worked enough with couples to see couples, veer away from contempt and actually mostly avoid it and actually build a relationship. So, they're not doomed, but if this continues to build, it's not likely to go well for them.
This is just too much. I don't feel comfortable. I don't like when she gets like this, and I don't want to do this right now. I didn't leave. I just needed to take a break from that conversation because it was getting to that point where it wasn't productive. One of the things that I've realized, or as I'm starting to realize through this process, that I'm not a big fan of when we talk. So when you get upset, you get demonstrative and you do like this little thing like this. Slightly disrespectful.
I do this.
Okay, so he is making a request. Again, I wish he would use more of an I statement, and more of an I position of, this is a differentiated thing to do, is for Michael to say something like, when you do this, when you get elevated and it feels like you're really aggressive, it hurts my feelings. And it makes me think when you're in that state, you're not really open to what I'm having to say. And you're just getting angry at me and without listening and without calming down and trying to work things out, because I don't think I deserve that much anger from you. So that's more of an I position. When you're angry, it affects me, and I am scared, and it hurts my feelings, and it makes me want to shut down. Instead of saying what he's saying, which is, you do this, you can't do that, that's bad, that message. It's in the right direction. He's identifying the behavior that he doesn't like, but the difference here is that when you say to someone like Meka, anyone, a criticism like, you're a yeller, you get angry too much. Okay. So what's the emotional reaction to that? It's hurt, right? It's, oh, I'm a bad person. Ow, that hurts. My spouse thinks I am a bad person, or I do bad things. Ouch, that hurts. Okay, let's try a different mode of communication. Michael says, when you do that, when you're very demonstrative, it scares me, actually. It reminds me of the abuse I went through when I was growing up, or whatever he says. And it makes me, and then I get reactive, and then, you might see me look away, or I leave the apartment, or I start getting upset and angry, and I start saying nasty things. And so that's what's happening for me on the inside. In the moment, it's hard for me to really notice that because I'm getting so flustered. But when you raise your voice and you start doing this with your hands, it actually scares me, and I can feel it in my chest. I get real kind of scared. Now, in that situation, in contrast to the first one where Meka might be hurt, like, oh, I'm a bad person. In this instance, it's like, oh, my spouse is afraid, and I can help him by changing my behavior. I feel bad for I don't want my spouse to feel afraid, especially of me. That's terrible. All I have to do is change my behavior and I get to solve that problem in my spouse. Sign me up, because I care about my spouse and I love my spouse. So that's a different thing, right? Meka, you are aggressive. Ouch, right? Meka, ouch. Michael says, Meka, when you raise your voice, I get scared. Totally different message, but is concentrating on different parts of the experience. And really, the more healthy way is actually concentrating on your experience. You want to get to know your experience and communicate that. That typically will provoke an empathic response from your partner. At the very least, it won't provoke a defensive response. Sometimes it does. And when I work with couples and the defensiveness kicks in, even though you are taking responsibility, it's usually because you as a couple, and maybe you as human beings, have had a track record of never having these kinds of conversations work out. And so when you do change your behavior, and some of you might have been watching these videos and like trying out these I statements with your spouses and seeing your spouse not react well. Well, it's because your spouse might not have ever seen that kind of behavior. And so you have to stick with it for a long period of time. Anyway, let's get back to the show.
Definitely did that.
I do this.
It's still.
That's this and this are not the same thing.
It doesn't matter what it is. It's an action that doesn't make me feel comfortable. That should be taken into consideration when we have conversations.
I just want to be clear.
Any of this.
But I talk with my hands.
I feel you, but like when it comes off, when we're having a conversation and it comes off of you being angry, that's not received well. Especially if it's getting to a point where we're both frustrated, it then is interpreted different ways. That can be what you do generally, but.
So it's good. I wish there were more I statements, more I position from Michael, but it is pretty good. And Meka is listening, and so this sounds like it might actually be helping.
I'm just saying, when we talk, it comes off differently. Like, that's just the biggest thing for me right now. It doesn't allow for me to want to be more vulnerable or open up. And again, most of the times, and this is just how I feel, I'm not saying it's right, but it feels like these conversations go a certain way, you're mad or frustrated or angry, and I'm just kind of saying, like, yeah, but I don't get to that point until you get there, and then it's like, all right, well, cool.
All right, 2 thumbs up. Michael, awesome. He said, this is just how I feel. I don't know if it's right. That is 100% healthy thing to say. That's exactly what I was saying earlier. You have to tone it down. You have to take responsibility. I don't know if I'm right about this, but this is how I feel. And maybe I'm too sensitive. I don't know. But I'm just letting you know how I react to things. That's so much more inviting of empathy and care and change from the other person.
I feel like I've told you like repeatedly how much it bothers me when you walk away when we're having a conversation. And I've told you that that's like a big thing for me. I've explained it to you, I feel like, in like a lot of different ways, that for me is a huge thing. I understand you need your space, but when you talk about how I'm not big on communicating, that was the time for you to say, look, I need a couple minutes. I need to take a walk. You didn't do that. You just walk out. And it's like each time that you walk out, I'm left waiting to find out when you're going to return. It might be an hour. It might be a couple hours. I never know because you never communicate how long you need.
So I may have talked about this before. It's been a while since I've watched this show, actually. But this is a classic preoccupied, avoidant thing, or even avoidant, secure person, is that if you have avoidant attachment, and watch all my other videos to learn about that, a very, very common behavior is in the middle of conflict is to leave, because the avoidant person learned long ago that, 1, people don't really care, and 2, it's just better to get away from people. I'm better on my own. I'm here in this conflict. Get me out of here. There's a claustrophobia feeling that people will get. And he exhibits that. He also exhibits the lack of eye contact, which is also an avoidant attachment thing. To be clear, I've talked about avoidant personality, and that's very different from avoidant attachment. There's avoidant attachment style, and there's avoidant personality disorder. Avoidant personality disorder is akin to social anxiety. It's an extreme version of it, if you will. Listen to my deep dive on avoidant personality disorder. That is for patrons only. And if you want to learn more about avoidant attachment style, you want to listen to my, 15 hours of attachment theory deep dive that is also available for patrons only. Anyway, so for the other people, whether they're preoccupied or just secure attachment style, they will be upset when the avoidant person leaves because it hurts, right? And on my couch, I have had this conversation probably literally hundreds of times where this exact thing plays out. And so usually the solution is for the avoidant person, there's nothing wrong with for the avoidant person saying, I need a break. Because usually what they're thinking is, if we continue talking, this is just going to get worse and worse. And they're probably right. So it's not a bad thing to, separate, cool down. But the key is they have to say something like what Meka is actually suggesting, which is, hey, I need a couple minutes, or I need 10 minutes. I'll be back in exactly 10 minutes, and we will talk this out again. If he says that, then at the very least you'd be like, okay, I can plan my life. I don't have to just sit here and worry, is he ever going to come back? And she even took responsibility, which is great. She said, I've told you before that when you leave, it really hurts me. It really bothers me because of my past. I can't remember exactly what she said, but she was basically saying that based on my past, when people just leave me, it really triggers me. She didn't say those exact words, but that was the communication. And that is wonderful. She's taking responsibility. It gives Michael the chance to take care of Meka and say, oh, I don't want to trigger my wife's traumas about abandonment. I better take care of her in that. So this is a good conversation. It's interesting how negative these two can be and how positive they can be. All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Thanks for joining me out there. Please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.